All right, team, we are recording and here we go. This will then be accessible for you to review as needed. Okay. All right. I think you guys should see the presentation. So let's roll. Again, this presentation I did with the last block is about 25 minutes. I'm going to do my best to keep it right there, hopefully even maybe a little bit quicker. And then give you time on the back end of class to work on your bill analyses. I wanted to take some time to talk about Washington state government, what you will discover with respect to the Washington state government. A lot of similarities with the national government with as far as its structures go, also some pretty cool differences. And furthermore, Washington state, as I indicated to the last block yesterday, has some really unique opportunities presented its citizens that not all states have. And I'll show you sort of a map. We are uniquely empowered in Washington state to create positive change. And those details will come toward the end. All right, so let's kind of roll here. How is Washington state's government organized? To begin, there is a constitution. It was written in 1889. Some of you Seattleites, Washingtonians know this date. This is the date of that big Seattle fire. Perhaps some of you have taken those underground tours. They're so cool. Thank you. Yeah, they are so cool. As far as historical tours go, especially kind of the seedy life of Seattle in the late 19th century. All right. It is a long constitution, 70 pages long, 98 amendments, including one, I think the most recent, written in 2016. We have 3 branches of government. It's the same: legislative, executive, and judicial. So there are separation of powers, and also the idea of checks and balances. So not one branch has an inordinate amount of power. Okay, and the capital is in Olympia. Some of you have no doubt traveled to Olympia. I think SAS, if you went to SAS Middle School, perhaps you did a tour earlier on. We actually did a 9th grade civics tour for the class that's now seniors. So we've done that in the past as well. All right. There are 49 districts in the state of Washington. So this is the breakdown as far as representation goes. You have 1 senator for each district, and you have 2 House members for each district. So just like the national government in Washington, we have what's called a bicameral Congress, 2 houses or 2 chambers, an upper and a lower. The upper house, the Senate, 1 each. And the breakdown here, actually, I didn't distinguish, but that's 29 Democrats to 20 Republicans in the Senate. And the House, 2 members each, 57 Democrats to 41. So, yep, in Washington. So it's 2 members per district. And what they tried to do was carve out, and here are our 49 districts. You'll see that they are different size. And the places that have the greatest population density are the smallest. So there's an attempt to try to get similar population numbers with the different districts. So these districts that are very mountainous, lots of mountains, sparsely populated, are clearly bigger, right? And the urban areas are quite small. So there is an attempt. So there's 2 members per district, and it sounds kind of like the New Jersey plan where it's sort of 1 each, 2 each, right? But what we have here actually is an attempt to get proper representation according to the districts. And they do that by making really small ones and really big ones. And you can see here, this is according to voting trends. You'll see that Eastern Washington is quite Republican. Western Washington is quite Democrat. And, you know, just taking this moment to note, it actually comes up from time to time. There is sort of a push from Eastern Washingtonians to separate and become their own state. Because as you can imagine, You can see that the government itself is really democratic and doesn't necessarily represent the unique interests of the eastern part of the state. Yeah.
Our state would look really weird if it did that. We just look like, yeah, our state.
Yeah, it'd be something else. I mean, and to I guess push this thought further, it's not just a geographical boundary. There is a geographical boundary there, but yeah, the Eastern Washington also, there are some pretty profound ideological differences, as we can see here. All right. Legislative sessions. It's 60 days on even years, 105 days. So they work extra hard on odd years. It is an odd year. Why do they work harder on odd years? Because the odd years are when you have to do all the budgetary items. So the legislative, the work days are longer for legislators in odd years. All right, keep moving here. Here's a face you've no doubt seen. Governor Jay Inslee. He's essentially the president of Washington State. That's basically what he is. He is the executive, the top of the executive branch there. The other executive powers include an attorney general, the head officer of the state, Bob Ferguson. Why were people wearing shirts that said "I'm with Bob" a few years ago? I'll tell you. He's a popular figure. In fact, he was actually thinking of running for governor himself if Inslee was going to make it either as president, because he ran for president, or in the president's cabinet. But alas, he is still our governor. Some other important people, the treasurer on the bottom. I want to draw attention to Kim Wyman on top. She is the only Republican who's a statewide elected official. These are all sort of statewide elected officials here. And she is the only Republican. She is also the Secretary of State. What does that mean? That means she is in charge of running elections. Yes, our elections, which are extraordinarily accessible. It's very easy to vote in the state of Washington. They mail you your ballot. You fill it out on your own time. You turn it in on your own time. It's accessible, it's easy to get to. Yeah, that whole structure is brought to you by, on behalf of our Republican elector, Kim Wyman. Okay. Supreme Court. There is a Supreme Court, and there is also 9 members in the state of Washington. Who appoints them? How long are their terms? You might guess that the governor would appoint them, kind of like the president appoints Supreme Court justices, but you would be wrong. These individuals are elected by us, and they serve 6-year terms. Unlike your national Supreme Court, they're elected for life, or excuse me, appointed for life. These individuals are elected by us and serve 6-year terms. Yeah.
What if they do something like that? Then can they get like, can we kick them out?
You know what? I don't know the process for which removing justices is. I do not think there is a pathway for that. We will talk about a pathway for removing other elected officials that are corrupt, though. Okay, so that is sort of the basic framework. Some similarities, also some differences, and I think some really compelling differences. Really helps us to reimagine what a Supreme Court can look like. What if our national Supreme Court was elected in rather than appointed? What if they served terms rather than had, served for life? Some pretty cool things. All right, so here I want to take you through a case study about checks and balances with respect to the courts in particular. We talked about how the president can appoint Supreme Court justices. The president also appoints so many other federal judges that operate from different states. So many different judges. So here's an example of a dialogue that exists between a federal court in the state of Washington and the executive branch, as well as will ultimately be the Supreme Court. And I'll just read this. In 2017, the president passed an executive order. And these are kind of like legislation. They have teeth. Yeah, question, Hugo? Yes, the slides are on Schoology as well as I'm recording right now, so you'll have access to this. Yeah, so just think big picture. But in 2017, President Trump passed an executive order, and these are, if we talked about how hard it is to pass a bill and to get legislation, if it is determined that there is an emergent situation, perhaps even a crisis that needs to be addressed, the president has powers to pass what is essentially like a bill or pass like a law. And he passed this executive order. And I should say this is very common among presidents to pass executive orders. President Biden has also passed numerous executive orders already during his term. But what he did was he signed executive order 13769, which stated that banned foreign nationals from 7 predominantly Muslim countries from visiting the country for 90 days. It suspended entry from Syrian refugees indefinitely and prohibited any other refugees from coming into the country for 120 days. This was popularly at the ground level referred to as the quote unquote Muslim ban. The official name again is the Executive Order 13769. So what happened? Bob Ferguson, our chief officer here in the state of Washington, brought a lawsuit against Donald Trump to a federal judge who looked at this executive order and determined that this was unconstitutional. And it revoked the executive order, not just in the state of Washington, across the whole country. So this is the power of our federal judges in the state of Washington and across the country. And of course, Donald Trump had a comment here, calling him the so-called judge. And again, I kind of mentioned these federal judges are appointed by presidents. This judge, James Robart, was appointed by George W. Bush, also a Republican. All right. Ultimately, this escalated to the Supreme Court, in which the Supreme Court actually also ruled it unconstitutional with a 5-4 ruling. This is the first iteration of this bill. There will be, or this executive order, there will be a second one, which will also be overturned. And then ultimately a third one, a third version of this would end up passing. And the way they ultimately got it to pass was to include other countries, not just Muslim dominant countries. So for instance, also banning refugees from Myanmar, which was in the throes and continues to be in the throes of a genocide. Okay. So I want to just take a real a step back here and think about and set this in this historical context. We're going to talk about sort of the emergence of these really, I mentioned these 3 super cool things that we have access to as Washington state citizens, these levers of power. Again, not everyone has them. And I want to set them into the historical context and look at the progressive era, or excuse me, the Gilded Age. This was a time with, it is called the Gilded Age. I believe Mark Twain actually is the one who called this time period the Gilded Age. And gilded, not golden, because the exterior is super shiny and pretty, but on the interior, it's corrupted and fake and corruptible, okay? So gilded, shiny on the outside, but deeply corrupt. And that's sort of the Gilded Age. So on the exterior, looks very shiny and bright. The reality of the Gilded Age is that there were enormous amounts of people, not just living in poverty, but extreme poverty with limited access to rights and political power. So as a response to this, it gave birth to what's called progressive reforms, an attempt to equip the common people with political power and take it from the businesses and the corporations and the wealthy who are really dominating politics at this time. So what are these? And I'll kind of just move a little bit quicker here. What are these? Initiatives, referendums, and recalls. These are the 3 things that we had. Here are some images of child labor, just another instance of social problems and political problems. Okay, so initiative. This is a means by which a petition signed by a certain number of registered voters can force a public vote. What does that mean? This means you see, like, for instance, at these farmers markets, people's asking for signatures. They are asking for signatures and they need 260,000 signatures. That is 8% of the total voting Washington state population from the last election that was what's called a gubernator, what's the governor election? What's the adjective I'm looking for? Doesn't matter. The governor, last time they elected the governor. So they tried to select an election, kind of like a lot of people today only vote if it's a presidential election. In Washington state too, maybe there's some laziness around elections, but they want to vote when the governor is up. So they go to the last governor election, and you need to acquire 8% of that population, which is 260,000 people. And if you can get 260,000 registered voters in the state of Washington to sign one of these petitions, your bill can navigate around Congress, Washington State Congress, and go straight to a ballot. You do not rely on the traditional mechanisms of legislators to introduce your bill, debate your bill, amend your bill. You navigate around that whole thing and you take it from your idea. You pay $5, throw it up on the internet, send out teams of people to get signatures at farmers markets or wherever, and you can have your bill put on a ballot. There's another way in which you can sign an initiative that will take it to the floor as well. But this is what's called a people initiative. So it's pretty exciting. We talked about how hard it is for a bill to become a law. The same processes are in place in Washington. And this allows you to navigate around that whole process. It's so exciting. Referendum. This is an opportunity in which you can undo what you find to be an unjust law. I'll give you an example later on of what that is. So create a law, referendum, undo an unjust law, and then finally recall. And this is where you can remove bad leaders from office. And in fact, some of you, I bet many of you are aware that there is a recall going on currently in the state of California. And Caitlin Jenner, I believe, is looking to run for the governor of the state of California. So there is a recall and they do have the number of signatures they need to remove the current governor. Caitlin Jenner running for governor.
Yeah, so they'll have a recall. Can you hear me, Adam?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to have a recall election against Gavin Newsom, and Caitlin Jenner is one of the people who would like to run, is going to run against Gavin Newsom.
Wasn't it because of his like
Yes. Yeah. So California also has a recall, clearly.
There's also a campaign right now going on in Seattle to try to have a recall of a city council member in Seattle.
Yes. Our very own city council member for Seattle Academy area. All right. Okay, so some examples. An initiative in 2018. It restricted governments from assigning taxes on soda. And I know I mentioned this as an example with another class at another time, but soda taxes being identified as regressive as opposed to progressive. Progressive means on behalf of the poor. Regressive means it targets the poor and hurts them inordinately. So how does the soda tax do this? Well, soda drinks are cheaper than other drinks. It's not necessarily that they want to drink the soda or the sugary drinks. It's because they are cheaper. It was believed to be regressive. That is a tax that targets the poor. Here's a referendum which redefined what marriage looks like in 2012. Referendum 74 legalized gay marriage in Washington State. This was the first state to do this, along with Maine and Maryland, I believe. And now this is a national law, a national right. So you see the ways in which these initiatives can work as labs to assess out how things go. And oftentimes you have these initiatives becoming more widely accepted and even nationally accepted. I think marijuana laws are working toward that as well. We'll see where that goes. Here is a map. This is our last slide. And just to give you a sense of really, again, how special this is. The blue states have all three: initiative, referendum, and recall. The red states have no paths for direct democracy through these three. None. The light green that you see, Florida, Mississippi, Illinois, you can do initiative, but you can't do the others. The darker green, you get to do initiative and referendum, but you can't do recall. And then in the orange, you can do recall. This New Mexico and Maryland are a little bit special because you can do referendums to the people only. It's just a special referendum, not the ones that, oops. So if we set again the progressive politics in its historical context, a lot of the wealth situated in the Northeast, and we're like, yeah, these are kind of, we regard them as sort of blue states, democratic states, and at the same time, these deep-seated problems of business and politics as well, right? So you see them on board with some of these what are traditionally Republican states as well. So again, very special to have all three. Here's the map. Proud of my Michigan, the Holy Land here being sort of an outlier in that they're pretty far east state, but also have all three available. Union's a big deal in Michigan.
Hey, Adam, we have one question.
Okay, sure. I'm done. So I'll take any questions.
So how would a state like Texas go about like establishing initiatives and referendums and recalls?
Like if Texas, for example, if the people wanted to have initiatives, referendums, and recalls, what would be possible paths toward that?
It's so hard because you need to get the legislators to pass the law, to allow people to pass laws, if that makes sense. So
that's impossible.
So you would need legislators, right? State representatives and state senators
yes.
who had that.
Yes.
Right. So you wouldn't be making an initiative to do it. You would just be expressing your interests to those legislators, hoping that they would take that up as issues in the state.
It's very funny.
Yes. And I think as one can imagine, you're essentially asking for people in power to relinquish power. And I wouldn't say it can't happen. I would say that it's a tough battle, right? So
to clarify, and I think this is what Dylan's asking about, or maybe you're just like expressing, wow, that seems frustrating. Right, you can't, but you can, right? There are other ways besides initiatives to pressure your state representatives to act on your behalf. For example, right? That's why people call their representatives. That's why people write to their representatives. That's why people, right? They protest, for example. So you can put pressure on representatives in different ways. And in places like Texas, that's the only path there is. We just happen to have multiple paths toward putting that pressure on.
Yeah, it's thrilling. We can completely navigate around legislators and bring our own bills to the ballot through quantity, the power of numbers.
The problem now, to bring up an issue of that, right? The problem is when there's a whole lot of initiatives and referendums on the ballot, sometimes voters are overwhelmed by the information, and they're like, I don't even know what this is. And they're flipping through their voter pamphlet and they're like, that sounds good. So there's with power comes responsibility, and our responsibility in Washington is sometimes reading through or trying to research to understand a whole lot of initiatives and referendums that are on the ballot.
Yeah.
That's not a bad responsibility. It just is one.
Yeah, it's true. And they can be deceptive because the titles could indicate that the bill does something that it doesn't necessarily do, or the initiative. All right, maybe I'll sign off now, but if people have other questions, I'll keep the Zoom chat open. Maybe we can, or people maybe can shout them out, but I'll at least transition. I'll shut the recording off and transition them to people that would like to work on their bill analyses.
Yeah, well, I'll let people Zoom if they want to talk to you specifically, Adam. I'll let people get on their Zoom call
Okay.
individually in the chat.
That works perfectly.
Cool.
Thank you.
I think that was waving maybe.
And